Stop the bombing. Let us save our national honor. Stop the bombing and stop the war. Let us save American lives and Vietnamese lives. Let us take a single instantaneous step to the peace table. Stop the bombing.
What is the difference in the opinion of your group and that one across the street?
Well, about as much difference as day and night. They believe the war in Vietnam is immoral and inhuman, and we believe it's essential to defend our freedom and to keep our word and our commitments.
While clergy throughout the United States debated American involvement in Vietnam, military chaplains serving in the war faced challenges of their own, balancing the often conflicting roles of religious leader and soldier while steadfastly maintaining their religious beliefs. In 1775, the Continental Congress established the Chaplain Corps, ensuring religious freedom and support for soldiers in the Army. From the Revolutionary War to the World Wars, Korea to Iraq, chaplains have played an essential and unique role in the military throughout American history, providing personal and pastoral care to soldiers in both times of peace and war. By the peak of the Vietnam War in 1968, nearly 2,000 Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish clergy volunteered to serve their country. Although endorsed by their particular religious institutions, chaplains served those of all faiths. They received military training through chaplain school, solidifying their role not only as religious leaders, but also as military officers.
We're non-combatants. We don't fight wars. We don't carry arms. In fact, if a chaplain's caught with arms, they're court-martialed and sent out of the battlefield.
Despite chaplains' non-combatant status, the controversy surrounding the Vietnam War, both in the United States and on the battlefield, created further tension between chaplains' dual identities of religious leader and soldier. While many would assume chaplains would compromise either their religious values or their military obligations, chaplains found another alternative. Rather than compromising, military chaplains chose to reconcile their roles by focusing on their support of soldiers to accommodate for the realities of the Vietnam War. One of the greatest challenges facing many chaplains serving in Vietnam was the morality of the war itself. In the early 1960s, at the beginning of the war, chaplains volunteered for what was viewed as a noble cause, the ending of communist aggression and the oppression of innocent civilians.
Tonight, Americans and Asians are dying for a world where each people may choose its own path to change. This is the principle for which our ancestors fought in the valleys of Pennsylvania. It is a principle for which our sons fight tonight in the jungles of Vietnam.
Yet even in the most just wars, some degree of conflict exists between religious doctrines against killing and the need to take up arms against an enemy.
And here is this service going on. In the middle of the service, you can hear B-52s carpet bombing the next ridge over. And the song that I was leading the soldiers in singing had the words, "And they'll know we are Christians by our love." 6 or 7 years later, I thought, wow, there is maybe a disconnect here.
At times, this conflict became immediate, such as in 1967 when Chaplain John Durham weighed his options, trapped in enemy territory alongside a conscientious objector and 2 wounded soldiers. Should he act as a soldier or a religious leader? Where the rationale for war was justified, chaplains reconciled inherent potential conflicts between beliefs in the sanctity of life and the need to take up arms. Still, many chaplains questioned whether or not Vietnam was a just war that required U.S. involvement. They heard about protests at home, including some led by clergy, and witnessed firsthand some of the horrors of war, and of the Vietnam War in particular.
I think the conflict emerged gradually later on when it was a conflict between the commitment to being there and serving the soldiers and an increasing awareness that this particular war was wrong.
I always say that the line in war is how much bad can you do for the sake of good.
As the war continued, anti-war sentiments increased, resulting in added challenges for chaplains whose job it was to act as a moral leader amid what many viewed as senseless killing. More soldiers claimed conscientious objector status, and for the first time, chaplains were required to determine the sincerity of the claim.
If a person is a real conscientious objector, I could help them apply for that category and they could get out of the military.
Granting conscientious objector status could undermine the effectiveness of the unit, while not acknowledging a soldier's values would compromise the chaplain's role as a religious leader. Despite apparent conflicts, most chaplains never considered compromising their faith, which would relinquish their purpose as a chaplain and make them incapable of performing their duties.
No, I didn't feel I was compromising anything. As a matter of fact, it still bothers me when people just condemn everything that ever happened over there, because they forget a part that these guys were drafted.
Rather than compromising, chaplains address these moral questions by focusing on the soldiers whom they served.
But the morality of war, of a specific war, is not my purview in the midst of war. So I can pontificate later all I want, about whether we should have gone, shouldn't have gone, whatever. But in the midst of war, my job is to be the pastor, is to take care of soldiers, their religious needs, their social needs, their crisis of faith, whatever it may be, because war is hell.
By focusing on their service to the troops, rather than questions regarding the morality of the war in Vietnam, chaplains reconciled their dual identities of religious leader and soldier, rather than compromising their values.
Again, I think lots of folks had very strong opinions about Vietnam, and they kept it to themselves while taking care of soldiers.
A second moral challenge faced by chaplains was related to what many viewed as immoral social conduct among many soldiers, including illegal drug use. 25% of soldiers used marijuana, and 1 in 5 enlisted soldiers were addicted to heroin towards the end of the war. This conduct created additional conflict for chaplains. If unable to act as moral examples, chaplains jeopardized their credibility as clergy. Simultaneously, if unable to adequately relate to the soldiers, they jeopardized their military credibility.
Because they like to see that you're normal. You're not so far out that you're not one of them.
However, to engage in similar behaviors would compromise their religious and moral beliefs. Rather than passing moral judgments, chaplains reconciled this conflict by again turning to their role as a support.
In the American military, the chaplain is the only person who has 100% privileged communication, confidentiality.
In many cases, chaplains counseled soldiers to seek help.
I could convince them to trust the system enough to go for help.
Chaplains had to choose their moral battles, adapt to constantly differing situations, and maintain personal behavioral standards. Following the Vietnam War, the chaplaincy itself underwent reconciliation of its conflicting roles. In 1979, Joel Katkoff and Alan Weeder filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Secretary of the Army, John Marsh, claiming that the use of chaplains in the military violated the Establishment Clause of the Constitution by entangling church and state. However, after review in the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, the court found that chaplains provide soldiers with the opportunity to practice their religious beliefs, a right guaranteed by the Free Exercise Clause.
There is always a need for a spiritual aspect in the lives of those who had really opted to, if necessary, give their lives for their country.
Once again, conflicts between military chaplains' dual identities were reconciled, as they were in Vietnam, by focusing on the needs of the soldiers whom they served. In addition, the increased cultural and religious diversity of troops during Vietnam heightened awareness of the need for greater diversity in the faith backgrounds of the chaplains.
We had a very decided increase in the number of minority chaplains in the military, not to mention female chaplains also.
Soldiers in all wars and conflicts now have access to the specific religious support they need from over 200 denominations, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam. Today, the role of chaplains in the military has been shaped by those who served in Vietnam. The thoughtful way in which they reconciled, rather than compromised their sometimes conflicting roles, has become the standard for chaplains serving in modern wars. Through their reconciliation of roles, chaplains in Vietnam helped clergy of all wars to navigate the front lines of faith.
The rewards of being a chaplain were so great to me because I was helping people who really were putting their lives on the line, and I knew I could make a difference. I knew I could help.